Hello and welcome to Adava Learning. In this video, we are going to see how we can configure IP addresses on Red Hat Enterprise Linux using nmcli. Now, this is one of the vital steps in order to get started with Red Hat Linux because when you boot up your Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you're supposed to register the server. You're also supposed to update the packages, but all of that cannot happen unless and until you have some IP addressing, unless and until you have your network connectivity. So we are now going to see how you can configure IP addresses, your DNS entries, and have or establish connectivity to the internet using all through nmcli. So this is our virtual environment. This is primarily EVE-NG. And in this virtual environment, what we have is a management switch. And this switch provides us connectivity to a NAT virtual bridge, which basically helps us connecting to the internet. Connected to this management switch are also three Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers, which we will be configuring. So let's pick one of these servers. So we will right click and start this node. When you start this Red Hat Enterprise Linux node, it's basically booting up your version 8.4. This image that we have in this virtual setup is Red Hat or RHEL 8.4. So we'll wait for Red Hat to boot up. Now, once this boots up, it will prompt you or it will get you to a login screen. So here we are. So you can log in using a default user, which comes along with RHEL, or you can log in with root user. Now, I'm not showing you the boot up or the initial installation process because this is a virtual environment. The goal is to understand how to configure or set IP addresses and DNS entries on your Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So we will enter the password and wait for it to log in and get us onto the screen. So we will click on next for these default settings, skip, and we are good to get started. So we go to this Red Hat icon, and when we click on it, it will give us a sidebar which will have access to the terminal. So from the terminal, we can first check which all interfaces exist on this Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So we can run the command nmcli device, and we can see the device is ENS3. Now, ENS3 happens to be the interface which is connected to that management switch. Also, as part of the default configuration, the NAT device where the NAT gateway is configured, which is a virtual interface on the server, it's also configured to allocate IP addresses. Right. So if I run the command IP space A, I can already see that IP address has been allocated to this particular interface. But when you are deploying any server on a production environment, we don't work with DHCP addresses. Why? Because, usually we have these IP addresses mapped to a DNS name. And if the IP address changes, the DNS name resolution will cause issues. So the best practice is, especially for servers where you are supposed to run some sort of services, for example, DNS service, LDAP service, or Kubernetes, or any other service that you want to deploy on your Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you basically assign a static IP address. So what we are going to do is we are going to look at the first step is to see if there is a configuration profile that you have in nmcli. So we can run the command nmcli configuration connection, nmcli connection show config. So I am thinking if I have a profile named config. I don't. So you can see there's no such connection profile. So now we can create a profile, a connection profile named config, and associate that ENS3 interface to this profile. So we will run the command nmcli connection add con-name config if name which is interface name, ENS3, and the type is Ethernet. So this creates a profile named config on our Red Hat Linux system. Okay. Now, once we have created this profile, this should have a default configuration and default settings. So I can maximize this window and show you what the default config looks like. So nmcli connection show config. Now, when I run this command, you can see that I have these default parameters that have been set. If I look at the IPv4 method, so IPv4 addresses and gateway, they're not set. The IPv4 method is set to auto, which means it will get IP address allocated using DHCP. That means automatic allocation of the IP addresses on the NIC card or on the interface, which we don't really want. So now what we are going to do is we are going to change that using the nmcli. So nmcli connection, modify, and the profile name. And then we have these attributes that we can work with. So if I try to change the IPv4 method without assigning some IP addresses, it will not allow me to do that. For example, let's take a look at it. So I can paste here and say manual, and it's going to give me an error saying that failed to modify the connection config. The IP address property cannot be empty for method manual. So first you have to assign an IP address, your gateway, and then you can change the IPv4 method to manual. Okay, let's do that. So nmcli connection modify config IPv4 dot addresses 172.129.190/24. So you can see the IP address has been allocated. Now I'm going to set the gateway, CLI connection modify config IPv4 dot gateway 172.129.129.254. So our gateway has also been set. So one important note, when you set the gateway, it automatically creates a default route with the next hop as the gateway address. And we'll look into that in just a few moments. Now, the last thing that we got to do is from assigning some values is setting the DNS entries. So nmcli connection modify config IPv4.DNS, and it's going to be 8888 or and 88.4.4. So we have set these two DNS entries. Now, once you have set these DNS values, the next thing that you can do is you can change the method to manual. So now if I do an up arrow and set IPv4 method to manual, it will accept this configuration. Now, once all these values have been assigned, the next step is you bring up this connection profile. So we can configure nmcli connection up and the name of the profile. So the moment you do this, you can see the profile has been activated, the connection has been activated. Now at this point, if you run the command IPA, you can see that the IP address of ENS3 has now been set to 190. Earlier it was set to 1.124, but it's now set to 190. And we should also have a connectivity towards the gateway. So ping 172.129.129.254, because the interface on the switch, that the management switch and the external interface, which is providing us with internet connectivity, is all connected in the same VLAN. So you can see we have connectivity to the gateway. We should also have connectivity towards the internet. So ping 8.8.8.8. We can see we are able to reach the Google DNS servers. And if I now try to look at the routing table, IP route show command, you can see that there is a default route. Now, this is because we configured a default gateway pointing with the next hop as 172.29.129.254. Okay, and this is basically providing us with connectivity to the internet. So now if I try to ping google.com, I can see the reachability being established from this server. Now, this is one of the important steps, as I mentioned earlier, because this is going to help us, register this particular server and also update the packages on the server so that we can get started on installing other services on this Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to our channel. We will be coming up with more and more videos on networks, cybersecurity, cloud, AI, and so much more in the coming days. Thank you.